Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Kent, and I'm joining Chris Bean. Mr. Bean?
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to be talking about developing your curriculum. Your curriculum and lesson plan is your school's foundation. If you have loosely defined requirements for your students, or you do not know what you are going to be teaching tonight or even a month from now, that is something that needs to change. Use this episode as a tool for developing your lesson plan and your curriculum. If you already have a clearly defined curriculum and lesson plan, use this as a refresher to see if there are any new ideas you can add to what you are already using.
So developing your curriculum, requirements for every belt level. This sounds like a really obvious thing, of course, but having those clearly defined requirements for every belt level is crucial when it comes time to advance your students and test them on the requirements. If you don't have or know what those requirements are, how are they going to be able to pass or be expected to know what to do at belt testing? Of course, and hopefully this isn't you, but if it is, maybe we can fix this moving forward. There are some schools where the instructor has a loose idea of what the students should know at each belt level, but nothing really is written down. I strongly recommend going through the process of developing a curriculum for each belt level. Have clearly defined requirements for each belt level for your entire student body, for every one of your belts. Set out goals, expectations for your students to live up to improve them, but also then so they have an aim for each of their belt ranks. If you're starting fresh and developing a curriculum from scratch, the process that I use, and I would recommend that you would use, is to start with your highest rank. Start with your black belts. What do you want your black belts to know? And then systematically work down backwards. So your black belts know these 100 moves. Okay, so then the belt rank before that, maybe they need to know 90 moves. And the belt rank before that, and so on, all the way down until you get back to the beginning. And then you may choose to add or subtract or rearrange how those requirements are laid out, of course, but at least have that as your starting point, right? So think about what you want the end goal to be. What do you want a black belt student to look like? What do you want your black belt students to know and have down and be able to perform? And then again, just work backwards from there until you get down to the beginning, and then there's your goal. Sometimes if you do it the other way around, if you start at white belts, either by the time you get to black belt, you still have information that you would like the black belts to know, or you run out well before you get to black belt. And so starting with the end and then working down backwards, I have found that to be a good way to go about that. And depending on your school, your style, you may already have these lists of requirements for black belts, right? If your system, if your organization has black belts need to know this and so on, you may already have that part down. And then it's just a process of deconstructing that and moving those requirements backwards so that they can learn those things in a systematic type process, or systematically learn those things so that by the time they get black belt, they know what they do. Or they know what to do. They have those requirements down because they've already tested and passed on those things going through your ranks. You may find as you're going through this process that you want to add in extra information. So let's say the hand techniques for green belt are a hammer fist and a karate chop. And so during that belt rank, maybe you want to add in some combinations or some drills that they do at that belt level that include those movements. That would be absolutely something you can do. And of course, if you are in the process of making this or developing this or revamping your curriculum, think about what are some drills that you can include that would improve the student's performance on their hand techniques or their foot techniques or whatever the area of curriculum is. What are some ways that you can get the students to improve those things, those material, make those look even better by the time they test on those things? Now, as you're developing these curriculums, once you have this all laid out, all done, it might take maybe a belt cycle or two to kind of get everything dialed in where you actually want it to be at. You might, early on you might make some tweaks and some changes, but once you get things pretty well set, it's important that you give your students access to those curriculums. Otherwise, you are asking your students to reach a goal or hit a target that they can't see, that they don't know about. Sure, they come to class and you tell them, hey, listen, anything we do in class is going to be, perhaps is going to be on the belt test. Well, from a student standpoint, that is a difficult thing to practice for. And what that might end up meaning is they practice so many things that are outside of what they actually need to be practicing because they're fun or they're exciting or they're cool to do, but they're not actually practicing the core, the foundation, the things that you are going to be testing them on. So by having access to that curriculum, they can look at the sheet of paper or look at it online or whatever. Yep, okay, I need to know this, and then this, and then this. And so when they're practicing, they can go through and practice this, and that gets them a roadmap, a opportunity to see exactly what they're going to be doing on the test, and then they can practice those things so that they know when the test time comes, they're set, they're prepared, they're ready to pass that because they know exactly what is expected of them for that belt test. Now, on top of that, I would even recommend that you have the students know what they're going to test on. So in class, you would ask, let's say, yellow belts, what are your hand techniques? What are your new hand techniques that you're going to test on? And then they tell you, okay, it's a inside-outside block and a side punch. Okay, what new kicking techniques do you have as a yellow belt? Well, we have an axe kick and a side kick. And ask them to verbally tell you the things that they're going to test on. And what this does is this furthermore gets them involved. It gets them to know and understand what's expected of them. It's not just on a sheet of paper that perhaps is on their refrigerator at home. It's something they interact with, something they actually know, okay, I need to know this and this and this. Those are the new things that I'm going to have to do for my test. Sure, of course, maybe you're going to have them do the previous belt levels requirements as well. Great, awesome. But the important thing is those new things. What are the new moves that they're going to test on? And they, I believe, should be able to tell you. You should ask them, hey, listen, what are your new foot techniques? What new self-defense do you have? What grab, what throw, whatever the move is, but they should be able to verbally tell you what they're going to be testing on. Add that as a requirement for your students. When you're setting up your curriculum, try to match up the moves. And so, for example, let's say as a white belt, they need to know hand techniques, a low block, a middle punch. And in their form, they do a inside-outside block and a side punch and a back kick and all sorts of other moves that they don't actually need to test on for that requirement. Well, that may be something you want to look at and try to sync up. And so if they're a white belt, for example, and we talked about they need to know low block and middle punch, maybe their form is built of low block and middle punch. And then at white belt, they also have to know front kick and roundhouse kick. So the white belt form is built on low block, middle punch, front kick, and roundhouse kick. And so you develop a pattern, drills that you do in class, a form, and the moves that they have to test on are the same moves that they're practicing in their form. What this will do is, as you're practicing those moves and you're drilling those things in class, it will help to reinforce those moves that they're going to test on because they're practicing in your up and down the floor hand techniques and foot techniques, but also every time you do that form or those pattern of moves, they're also practicing those same moves, the low block, the middle punch, the front kick, and the round kick. And furthermore, maybe you build some combinations from that. As your white belts, again, for example, they have low block, middle punch, front kick, and round kick. As they're in class, maybe you develop drills and combinations that are built on that. So they already have their hand techniques that they know and they practice all the time. Their foot techniques the same way. Their form is built from that low block, middle punch, front kick, and round kick. But furthermore, you give them combinations. So maybe they step forward with a low block and then they do a middle punch. Then they do the other side, low block, and they do the middle punch. And then for their kicks, maybe you do a combination where you say go and they do front kick, round kick, round kick. And what that does is that gives them drills. It gives you lesson plan drills that you can do in your class that directly impacts the students. It gives them extra practice on those moves. You're disguising the repetition. Instead of just doing the same move over and over in the same way, you're doing the same move, but in a various different ways to disguise doing the same thing over and over again, which can be boring both from the instructor standpoint and from the student standpoint. So develop drills and combinations that are built off of their hand techniques and the foot techniques, the things that they already have to know, the things that you already are going to be testing them on. Develop combinations and drills that are based on those to help reinforce the information that they are going to need and test on.
And really, it shouldn't be that difficult to do some of those things because they already know how to do that move. You're doing it in a different way. And it's not like you have to reteach an entirely new concept. It's the same concept applied in a different situation. So if you can have something or many different things that are similar, I think it's beneficial, like you said, not only to give them different ways to practice or different scenarios to practice in, but it shouldn't be that hard. I mean, if you can do it in one scenario, it'll transfer over into the next scenario. Of course, it's different and maybe a little more challenging, but it's not like a brand new foreign concept, which means you, as the instructor, don't have to teach 17 different things. You're just teaching that one thing a handful of different ways, and it all kind of flows and crosses over, which makes it a little bit easier as well.
And having combinations like this is a great way to reinforce the moves and the patterns that they're going to be performing. Like you talk about, that's not anything different. You're doing the same moves, you're just doing them in different patterns, different sequences, different drills, just to disguise that repetition, right? And that's a big part when we, as we start moving into our lesson plan development, which is going to be coming up next. As we start moving into that, disguising the repetition is going to be a real important part to your lesson plan. So having these extra drills and different ways to do the same moves is going to be crucial when it comes time to do those things on the floor. Now, when it comes time for belt testing, you can choose to test your students on those drills, on those combinations and those patterns that you've worked on in class, or you don't have to. You can use those as a teaching tool just to help to, again, disguise that repetition so they're doing the same moves and they're getting that good practice in it, but they're doing them in different situations, different drills, so they can continue to practice those. Again, it's up to you. You can test them on those at the testing, but you don't have to. You can leave those just in your lesson plan as a teaching tool just to get them to practice those moves in different ways. I touched on this already a little bit, but having access to the curriculum is beneficial for the students for a couple of reasons. Your students need to know what to practice, what to spend their time on. And if they don't have that, if they don't have a sheet of paper or an app or somehow they can go and look at the different things that they're going to be testing on, they're not going to know what to spend their time on. So having that and giving the students that or giving them access to those curriculums is very important so they know what to spend their time on, what to practice, what to focus on, so they know what to be or what they're going to be tested on. If they have no idea what is expected of them when they show up to belt testing, they may practice something completely off base that you did one time in class, but that was so fun that they wanted to spend so much time on that, but it isn't really relevant. It's not important for them to know that yet. Or they don't need that as just completely extra. And so when it comes time for testing, they know that really well, but they don't necessarily know the things that they're supposed to know because they didn't know what to practice, what to spend their time on. So give your students access to that curriculum. Now, I talked a little bit about as you're developing your curriculum, it may go through a few iterations. You may tweak and change things along the way. It's important that you do that after a grading cycle, after a belt test. What you do not want to do is give the students, okay, here, listen, these are the list of requirements that you're going to have to know for this belt test. And then a month in or 2 weeks in, you tweak and change that. But not everybody knows that. So if and when you do make changes, which of course will happen, and if not, right after you make it, throughout the years that you have your school, that you have those curriculums, they will change, of course. You're going to add things or take things out or just improve those processes along the way. Do that after grading cycles, not in the middle, right? So as soon as you get everything set, that way you do your grading cycle, boom, okay, here's your new lesson plan. Brand new, fresh. Here's some changes that are on it. Maybe you don't tell them that, but here's the brand new version of this. Then you give them access to that, and then the old ones go away. And then doing that again means that they start fresh with what those requirements are. If right away you notice something needs to be changed, either you make sure that everybody knows that, or you wait, do it just the way the curriculum says, and then after that grading cycle, then you make those changes. Try to think about the different situations, think about the different scenarios as you're building this curriculum, so that hopefully when you hand this or give the students access to your curriculum, you don't need to have any more changes. There's nothing else that needs to be done because it's already done. But of course, we don't live in a perfect world, and that doesn't always happen. Having a curriculum, again, is beneficial on belt testing because, of course, there will be times that you're testing your students and somebody will not know the things they're supposed to know, which means they fail their belt test. Now, if you don't have a set of requirements for them to know when they get to that belt testing, of course, they're not going to know what they're supposed to know because they don't know what they're supposed to know. So they get to their belt testing and they perform poorly, they fail. And then you tell them, well, you didn't know this, this, and this, and this. And they say, well, I didn't know I need to know this, this, and this. So having that curriculum means that you can tell them, hey, listen, these are the things you needed to test on. You told me in class that you needed to know this, this, and this. And then when it came time for a belt test, you didn't know those things. So I'm sorry. That's why you don't pass today. That's why you don't get your belt. Now, let's make a lesson so that we can work on these things so that next time you can improve on this and you can get your belt on the next round. Having that curriculum will be crucial in those moments. So you can tell the student, or you could tell the parent, or show them, hey, listen, this is what Johnny was supposed to know. You guys got the paperwork. Here's the list of requirements. Those are the things he needed to know. So as we move forward for this next round, let's make some lessons so he can work and learn these things so he can do better next time. And of course, we've talked about this before, but I recommend having requirements for your students and then testing those, quizzing those students on those requirements before they get to the big test. So you have a series of small tests, pre-test, or quizzes that your students have to go through before they go to the big test. Now, on these small quizzes, you test them only on one area of their information. So, for example, you have hand techniques, you have foot techniques, and forms. That's three. We'll just focus on those so as to not confuse you. Hand techniques, foot techniques, and forms. Now, as we talked about already, we have our curriculum set up in a way that the hand techniques and the foot techniques make up the form. So the form that they do is built from their foot techniques and their hand techniques. Now, in class, we quiz them over their hand techniques. If they pass, we put a color stripe on their belt. That's all laid out for them on their curriculum. So when for hand techniques, it's a red stripe. For foot techniques, it's a blue stripe, and for forms, it's an orange stripe. We have that all set up on their curriculum, so they can look at it and say, okay, we're going to do hand techniques today, and okay, I can see from the curriculum that's going to be a red stripe. They already know that. They know how and what that's going to look like for them. Now, because of the way the information is delivered to them, again, their hand techniques and foot techniques build their form. When they quiz over their hand techniques, if they pass, they get that stripe on their belt. They quiz over their foot techniques, they get their stripe over their belt. And if they can pass both of those, then they're eligible to test or quiz for their form. Now, if they show up to that quiz and they don't pass their hand techniques, then they're not eligible to be quizzed over their form, because if they don't know their hand techniques, then there's no way that they can pass on their form. So we have kind of a hierarchy built into those quizzes, so they have to pass the requirement of their hand techniques and their foot techniques in order to be eligible to quiz over their form. And again, that's just for us because our forms are built off of the hand and foot techniques. And if they can't do the hand techniques in a solo type fashion, then there's no way they can do them in their form. And so having that is very beneficial for us because it's stepping stones. And including those quizzes, those small tests before they get to the big test, I believe is important because those small tests, we can be very strict, very stern on those. And if they don't do it well, they don't pass. But the repercussions of not passing that are very small. So they show up on Monday, they get quizzed over their hand techniques, they don't quite know them or they don't quite have it all right, they don't pass. Hey, listen, you did this, this, and this, those are the things you need to work on. On Wednesday, they come back, they can try again. And until belt testing, we can continue trying those things, giving them feedback. Hey, listen, these are the things we need to improve on. They practice those things, they can try again next time. As opposed to they show up to the belt test, the big test, they fail that, they have to wait 3 months before they can try again. So having those small quizzes in place will help to give your students the confidence. If they pass that, great, awesome. Now you can move to the next area. Awesome, you passed that, great, let's move on to the next one. And by the time they show up for belt testing, they have all those stripes on their belt. They know they've done this whole belt test already. They've just done it in small little chunks. So they show up to the belt test, providing they practiced and they pass those other small quizzes, the test should be a breeze. It should be easy for them because they've already done it just in small chunk down fashions. Now, we do that not only for every one of our belt ranks, but also when you go for your black belt test. For us, we have pre-tests that they have to take. And so the pre-test for them, they have a third of their material that they do each time. And if they pass, then they get to move to the next one. And if they pass, they move to the next one. And then by the time they pass all 3 of them, they show up to the real black belt test. They do all of those things again. Again, they should be confident that they can do them because they've passed all the other smaller tests in order to get to the big test. It's the same kind of function for that.
An additional benefit to having a curriculum and having it accessible to everyone, not only students and staff, is that, let's say in a case where we've already talked how at our studio, at our school, normally one instructor is with one group for a whole quarter and they work with them on all their material and they focus on that one group and that one belt level. Well, what happens when that person can't make it? Someone else has to take their spot, or that person moves to a different spot for a day or something because of whatnot, or someone gets a belt level during a private lesson they're not normally used to working with. We might forget, we might not remember, or not even know what those belt levels need to know. So having that curriculum accessible to your staff as well. I come across a private lesson, or I work in a class with a belt group I don't normally work with. I can walk up and look at the curriculum and know that, okay, this belt group needs to know this, and this belt group needs to know this, and this person needs to know this. So that way we can make sure we're covering the correct material and covering the things that are actually relevant to that student at the level they are at. Because like I said, it's easy to get stuck in your group and know a lot about your group. Plus, it's hard to remember the exact requirements for everybody. I mean, we do the martial arts for a long time, and at the level that we are, at a higher level, it's everything. We just kind of know everything. So we need to make sure that we know where the cutoff is. That way we're not teaching things that aren't relevant, or we're not skipping over things that they do need to know. So having that accessible not only to your students, for them to understand their requirements, but also to your staff, so that they can understand their requirements not only for their group, but also in those times when they might interact with different belt levels that they don't normally come in contact with. It's a great resource for them as well. So hopefully this episode was a good look into why a curriculum is important and why we need to have a curriculum. That way we know at each belt level, both the staff and the student, what is required and what is expected of them, and we have that reference to go back to, and we have that goal to achieve. That way we know by the end of the quarter we want them to know this, this, and this. And then that incrementally goes up as the belts continue. That way when we reach that certain level, or reach that black belt level like we talked about, they know all of this stuff. And then after you develop the curriculum for below black belt, start developing higher curriculums, black belt, next level, next level, next level, so on and so forth. That way you always have a clearly defined list of requirements or expectations, and then we can, as we're going to talk about more, break up each class into ways that we want to deliver that information through our lesson plans. But again, you want to avoid having a very loose structure and just saying, hey, we'll do this today, or we'll do this today, because it's hard to keep up with that as a student and as an instructor, especially when you start to get more and more belt levels and more people. You're going to make sure you're always on the same page and you know what everyone has to do. That way it stays organized and structured, and that's going to help you manage your student body and manage your classes and manage your levels a whole lot more. So if you haven't already done a dive in and developed a curriculum for yourself, maybe this is the first step. Listen to this, go and do some reflection, discover what you want. And if you do have a curriculum already, this might be a good time to go back and revisit it, kind of look at everything, make sure it's all structured well, make sure it's the way you want it, make sure that you are actually doing what the curriculum says. And if not, you can kind of go back, revisit that, touch it up, and make it congruent and easy for everybody to understand and follow. That way we all know kind of the trajectory or the target that we're shooting for to make it to the different levels, or make it through the different classes, knowing what we should know and knowing it well.
As always, you can find us on the internet. We're on Reddit and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, Twitter as well. And you can find us at MA Teaching Tactics. That's MA Teaching Tactics for martial arts teaching tactics. And of course, you can find us on any podcast platform. Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.